Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Create Superior InDesign Experiences from Adobe Experience Manager in Seconds. My name is Chris Hausler. I'm the Director of Business Development for Typify.
And I'm Caleb Clauset. I'm the Vice President of Product.
Before taking over reins for Product Manager, Caleb worked hand in hand with some of our largest customers to help them achieve critical content velocity. What we're going to be covering today in this webinar is we're going to give you an understanding of who Typify is, the company, what Typify, the software is, explain how it works and how it integrates with Adobe Experience Manager, and then do a demonstration, or actually really two demonstrations of how you can create really beautiful content, impactful content from Adobe Experience Manager into InDesign. And that content can actually be edited within InDesign. So you could change the layout, those types of things within InDesign if you need to do such a thing. And then we're going to follow up with some questions and answers. And you can put your questions and things like that within the chat bar. So feel free to ask questions as you go along. Often throughout the presentation, those questions get answered in a way that might make sense to everybody. And if they aren't answered sort of within the demonstration, we will definitely address those questions in the question and answer section. So a little bit about Typify. We were founded in 2001. We're an Australian company. We're always happy to have people come down and visit us in our headquarters in Queensland, Australia, when we can actually fly again. But we have offices around the world. So we have them in Europe and the United States. And then we have customers also around the world in really just about every continent except for Antarctica. Not only do we have a lot of customers around the globe, but we have a lot of different types of customers. So we have insurance customers like Lockton, people like the institutes who develop content for insurance organizations, to Pioneer that make the car radios that go into a number of different cars, to a number of standards organizations, financial services organizations, travel guides. So what that means for you as a customer is that we've seen a lot of different types of content, and we know how to automate that content for you. Typify is an automated publishing platform built on InDesign Server. What we can do is we can take content from a content management system, Microsoft Office products, or other databases, and then we can dynamically lay that content out, leveraging our rules engine to create InDesign documents, fully rendered PDF documents, accessible documents, EPUB documents, and it can dramatically reduce your publishing time by 50 to 80%. So what you can then do is really create a rich experience with creative layouts and designs that are going to be impactful to your customers, that are going to give those customers the most information. And as part of that experience, this is some information that we actually gleaned from Adobe themselves, is that when they were looking at technical documentation and they were asking what kind of output channels are their customers looking for, the biggest output channel is still PDF by far. But then also there's a lot of other platforms that customers want to get, including HTML5, Kindle, being able to go into other databases, those types of things. So there's a lot of different types of output channels. And by automating the production of the PDF content, not only are you still providing that output that your customers are looking for, but it also enables you to reach your customer where they want to be. So it gives you that time to create the HTML5 pages that they might want. It gives you time to create the EPUB files that they may be asking for if they want a digital platform that's more remote. So it allows you to create that omni-channel experience and reduce time doing that. The other big thing that we see is silos. So we'll often see somebody that is maybe creating content, and they're the technical documentation team or the engineering team, or they're creating different types of research content if you're a financial services company. Then you may have somebody else that's creating marketing content. They're creating other different types of content, or they're trying to decide how to lay this content out. Then you may have the web team, and all these different people, they're all using a lot of the same content. They want to be able to share the same content. Again, create that same experience throughout the whole journey of a customer. And that's really hard to do with silos. But when you're working with Adobe Experience Manager and Typify, what this allows you to do is to bring those silos together in one common platform to be able to produce all those different outputs that I was just talking about. You can produce the HTML5, you can produce EPUB, you can produce that PDF document that you still want. You can share your content across your different teams because it's all in one place. And then you can deliver that content out. And what that means for you is that you can really reduce your time to market. This is really critical for the International Monetary Fund, where they're able to really reduce their production time by weeks with very, very complex content with tables spanning number of pages, and this is all automated so that they could really reduce that time and have the most up-to-date content possible. It also allows you to be extremely accurate. So one of our customers is Thomson Reuters, and they use Typify for their pharmacopoeia. It's a 1,000-page almost dictionary of every drug possible available on the market. What a system like Typify allows you to do is to be able to take that content from a database and be 100% sure that that content is going to be laid out correctly within the document. The other great thing about Typify is that you can do multilingual publishing very easily. So you can drive the content out of Adobe Experience Manager in multiple language and dynamically lay all that content out, not just in your Latin languages, but Cyrillic languages, Middle Eastern, Indic. So you can do all the different types of languages that you need to reach all of your customers. And really, because of the speed of composition, what this allows you to do is to spend more time with your customers. And they could be internal customers, or they could be your external customers, understanding what their needs are, what their requirements are. Again, meeting that customer where they want to be. And because you don't have to spend so much time in layout, and you can focus on what you're really good at, which is creating really good designs and really good information for your customers. And so with that, you can always be sure that you're going to have reliable, accurate information, the most up-to-date information to your customers. You can dramatically reduce your production time, which enables you to, again, create more content for your customers, more valuable content for your customers in multiple channels. So again, creating a richer experience for your customers. And part of that is not just the software delivered to you from Typify, but we also have a rich experience in providing the services and support that you require to get up and going. So we take great pride in making sure that our customers are as productive as possible, as quickly as possible. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Caleb for the demonstration.
Thanks, Chris. Let's dive right in. So working within Adobe Experience Manager, Typify is focusing on the assets. And so within assets, we have several example demos that we want to do for you today. And the first one I want to do is a marketing slick. So here we are within our content folder for the ARIA brochure. So we can look in here and we can dive in and look at our source content and DITA. All of this content, we have our WYSIWYG editor. We can look at the underlying source of our content. And all of this is going to be packaged up and sent through to Typify from that DITA map. So I'm going to select this DITA map here, and this adds a new Typify run job button to the interface. So when I click on this, it gives the Typify overlay where I can choose a workflow. And I'll show you what a workflow is a little bit later, but this is an external workflow to AEM. This allows us to take the packaged content from XML documentation, send that full package of DITA content and any assets, resolving all the references and links and so forth, send that over to Typify, where we resolve everything, pull it together, and compose a fully editable InDesign document. So I'll attach that workflow and click Run. And this will immediately trigger the job running over in Typify. And I'll toggle over to the Typify side of things. And we should see that running right here. And we can actually sort of tail this job as it's being completed. And here we have the final output. So from the InDesign side of things, from the Typify, we have produced a fully editable InDesign document. We have the PDF, we have the fonts and the links. We can actually package this whole thing up to deliver to a print vendor or so forth. But let's go back over to the AEM side of things. So after the job, the workflow has run on Typify, we return back the InDesign file in a PDF to Experience Manager, where I can download them and view them or edit them for further changes. So let's take a look at that PDF we generated. So here we have that final PDF, where we can see, beautiful high-res graphics, nice placement of the content, our tables, and the assembly instructions, and our back page. But there's a problem. If you look back at this front page, this caption at the top, it's hard to read because of the background image. So we want to make some edits to that content. So let's go back into AEM, where we can download the actual InDesign file. And if we look at our pages, we can see, yes, we have a problem. But the designer anticipated this and created a feathered background effect as an object style. And so I can apply that on a case-by-case basis, clear this out nice and neat, export out a brand new PDF that has that little modification added to it. And now I can see side by side, much more pleasing, much more readable. And this is the advantage of having the ability to generate live editable InDesign documents out of AEM. Now let's look at another example. So go back into AEM and I'll go to the top level of my assets and I'll go into my disclosure. So this is a different kind of content. We still have a number of different kinds of DITA files. And so we'll search through here for, again, a much deeper, larger DITA map. And again, I can select this file, flip into the Typify run job overlay, attach a different workflow to this because this is a different InDesign template, a different kind of content. So I attach this other workflow to it, run this through. Again, we can switch over to jobs and watch this content running through in real time. And here we have the final output. So again, we'll download this PDF and take a look at it. So here we can see this is for medical insurance, where we have different languages, English and Spanish. We have our sidebar boxes, various numbered lists, tables, and then the all-important, how much is this really going to cost me at the end? All of this content is generated and rendered on the fly from that DITA source in a matter of seconds. When we look at these jobs, our first demo took 18 seconds total to run, convert the DITA content into XML, produce the InDesign layout, and produce that PDF on the out. The second job, 29 seconds, larger DITA content, again, producing the InDesign file and the PDF and delivering it. Now, within these workflows, I can create this as a kit of parts, and the InDesign templates also work in the same way as a kit of parts. So this first AM job, we're going to take in the bundle of content from the XML documentation plugin. We're going to explode that and convert that from DITA into content XML. We're going to copy over our typefaces, make sure that we have the right fonts for this particular job on an as-needed basis. And then we're going to actually generate the InDesign document from that content. So we have an empty InDesign template prepared. We have our fonts we've pulled in from above, and we're going to combine all that together and then export out to a PDF. Now, if I wanted to add a second action in here and say, well, I want to take this final output and I want to package it. So I can package the InDesign output that's automatically inherited from above, and I want to put this into a packaged folder. I want to grab all the graphics as well and include the fonts. So I can have that as my new job and switch back over to AM. And so now when I run that same content through, select my DITA map, attach my workflow, run the job, and I can watch it running through, building those pages in InDesign, exporting the PDF, and then producing my full packaged collection of my InDesign file, and this one with my fonts. So in the end, the idea of how long this actually took, let's see, 28 seconds to compose the InDesign file, produce a PDF, and package the content for you as a user. So yes, exporting content from AEM in seconds. Now, if we want to take a look at the actual InDesign file that's behind the scenes, that template that's driving all this, let's take a look at that next. So if we look back at that brochure that we had applied that feathered background to before, the InDesign template, it's a kit of parts. So we can see in our Pages panel on the top right-hand corner, we have a series of different master pages that have been defined to specify where different regions of content is going to go. And we can start to see where we've created content blocks or named frames on the page that we can pull out and isolate content from that source DITA content. So we have our hero images for the front and back cover. We've got a main story frame where I want that content block, but we want to pull the address block out over in this bottom right-hand corner. We have different layouts we're using for the interior pages. We have an inside narrow page and an inside wide page. And then we have our side-by-side instructions. And if the instructions happen to run to more than 2 pages, they can overflow into a continued page. And then we have components. And this is where we get into that kit of parts that we're talking about in the actual layout, where we can start to assemble and vary the outputs and the layouts depending on what those requirements are. So if we think through in our DITA content, where we have this notion of a step as an element, and there are components within a step, that we have a group element called step. On the left-hand side, we can have the actual text component of that step. And the right-hand side, we have the graphical component. And then here we have another component we've made, or element in InDesign, that is our part, where we want to have the graphical component above and the caption or the label or name for that part below. All of these things are used and be able to be mixed or remixed to produce the output that you desire. Now, if we look at the other templates that we were using in the disclosure, let's download that one. And again, we can see a similar structure to this content, that we have different pages that may or may not be used in that output. So we have a table of contents, interior pages, an example page, the last page within the content. And so here in the template, we have, again, a different set of components that are designed particular to this layout. And so if we think about the ARIA brochure, these components are specific to this layout. We have a step and we have the part, whereas in this disclosure, we have a sidebar, a brand statement, and a copyright statement. And so this gives you that ability as a designer to create templates that are specific to the uses that you're needing. And you can extend it and augment it, and just thinking about, again, this as this kit of parts. So that is Typify in a nutshell, taking the content out of AEM or other content management systems, composing a fully editable live InDesign file, PDFs, EPUBs, other formats, and then passing that back to you. And so on that note, Chris, let's pass it back to you.
Thanks, Caleb. So what did we see? We authored and managed some content in Adobe Experience Manager. So we had the area lighting content, and that content was very different from the disclosure document that we showed. So you can see how we are managing different types of content within AEM. We could publish both of those types of content from AEM through Typify into InDesign. And then we created the PDF document and the InDesign document. The PDF document can be used for review, and then that InDesign document can be edited for further detail. We also explored Typify's modular templates and workflows, which enables you to get the full power not only out of Adobe Experience Manager, but also Typify and InDesign for very creative layouts and designs. So now we're going to take your questions and hopefully provide some answers to you. Okay, starting off, Caleb, why would you use Typify InDesign solution over something like, OT or FO?
There are several different reasons why we prefer InDesign and recommend it. For one, the number of people that know and use and can create templates in InDesign far surpasses those that can create even something that's close to what InDesign can do using OT or FO. I think in general, InDesign offers a much richer layout engine compared to DITA OT. But I think one of the things that it's really key is that with an FO-based solution, it's an all or nothing output. That what you get is it. But with InDesign, you have that ability to do partial automation. And you can hand touch or tweak or adjust things in that fully editable live InDesign document. Yeah, so I think that kind of summarizes why we think InDesign is a superior solution that you can leverage resources and designers, talent that you may already have and marketing and so forth to leverage that it's a much richer layout engine compared to OT, and it's a lot cheaper in many ways to develop an InDesign template than a comparable OT template.
All right. Another question is, what does it take if you're doing some rebranding or you need to really kind of change the design.
Well, I mean, that's a cool thing about working within InDesign is that it's just an InDesign template. You can change your typefaces, you can swap out logos, color schemes, all that sort of stuff by just modifying that source InDesign template. And because the structure is largely unchanged from a rebranding perspective, you just change the template, load that into that workflow as a new source template, and then you can just rerun the content through, and the new content will flow into that new template. So very simple and easy to deploy.
Now, somebody had a question about just kind of clarifying that editing the content, you can do that either in InDesign or updating from the original source and then publishing that content again.
Generally speaking, if you make a content change in the DITA that you're managing through AEM, that's not a live change. Most of the demos that we showed don't capture the full complexity of what's possible with Typify in regards to what we would call a floating element, something that's not fixed on the page, but is in a relative position based on where the anchor might be on the content. You can think to a certain extent like the way a footnote on the page exists, that you want to make sure that footnote starts on the same page where the reference is, that it's not disjointed. We also support that same kind of floating architecture for graphical or other sort of complex elements. And so every time you make a content change, you can move or change the locations of some of those anchors, and we want to reevaluate the rules your designer applies to make sure that we get those floats in the right location based on best practices and sort of the design intelligence that designer put in there. So yes, there is a case of sort of rewriting the content through the template to take advantage of the rules engine. But as we can see, the time to regenerate these files is largely negligible.
All right. Somebody asked, does it only work with Adobe Experience Manager?
Well, no, it doesn't. We have customers that are working with Microsoft Word on the front end as their content tool, and they're managing files just sort of loose in a file system. We have other customers that are working with other CMSs. Typify is sort of agnostic in that sense. What we're showing today is, though, an integration with the XML documentation plugin for Adobe Experience Manager.
All right. Here's a tricky question to answer. And Chandy, I don't know if this might be one for you. What indicative range of savings does Typify typically offer?
I could answer this in cost savings or time savings. I mean, I think the general way that we kind of look at this is like comparing the automation to doing things by hand. And we easily say that, as Chris pointed out in his preamble, there can be savings of upwards of 80% just in that time to market from the automation that we can achieve versus having a full-time equivalent employee doing the same layout in InDesign. Chris, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, there's a number of other kind of components to that when you're considering creating content for customers, is that it's not just that one PDF document, especially with something like Adobe Experience Manager, where you can create that content for the web, but then that same content can then go out to PDFs, multiple PDFs. So you could create an accessible PDF. You can have one for the web. You can have one ready to print. You can create an EPUB file for customers, all from that same content and not requiring a ton more resources to be able to do that. So that's a good question, but definitely a tricky question. Yeah, I guess another question is it on cloud or is it on premise?
Both. Typify works in the cloud. We also have deployments on premise. Same thing with Adobe Experience Manager. Adobe has recently launched AEM as a service in the cloud. I think whichever way you want to go, you can be supported.
What about like if you have tables in Excel and those types of things?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned earlier, we have a number of customers that are using Microsoft Word on the front end. And so we natively can extract or ingest content from Microsoft Word through the OpenOffice XML. And Excel tables are the same. There is also OpenOffice XML. And so we can ingest that content and map Excel cell styles to the equivalent in InDesign to create InDesign cell styles. We can resolve formulas that are in your Excel tables so that whatever your calculations are, that will come through as fixed content in InDesign. InDesign doesn't have the equivalent to the actual live formula. So we take the value or the product of those formulas, and that's what's going to be rendered in the InDesign side of things. But absolutely, we can pull in all manner of different kinds of XML, not just DITA. And then we can move that into our content XML, which is kind of an interchange format, and then use that to lay out into InDesign. And I know one of the other things that oftentimes comes up is what we demoed is a one-way path from AEM XML documentation, which is DITA source content, that passes through into content XML, and then we render that to InDesign. And yes, we do support round-tripping workflows where you can make content changes in InDesign and we can export from InDesign back to the content XML. And then it's just a matter of making sure that you have essentially a reverse transform to go from that content XML back to your source.
Another sort of InDesign-y question is, why would you use Typify with InDesign? Why can't you just use InDesign?
Well, I mean, I think for one, Typify automates InDesign. Typify is built on top of InDesign and InDesign Server. So we still use InDesign. Your graphic designer will create the template in InDesign Desktop, and then we'll use InDesign Server to render the content into that template. But the speed at which we can compose the files in the automation, that's the main reason to use Typify. We provide both an architecture around InDesign Server to help structure content and structure your templates in InDesign, as well as the rules-based engine for how to apply the design intelligence and creating that kind of kit of parts that InDesign out of the box doesn't provide those levels of features. So I think there's quite a bit of value add, but comparison of spending 6 to 8 man weeks producing a layout with doing your table of contents and the indexing and all the chart placements and figures and so forth, and then the content change comes in and having to deal with reflow and repagination. With automation, it's a non-issue because you just click the button and it re-renders and everything's reevaluated and you get a brand new file that everything works and looks beautiful.
Great. So there's one more question down. Oh, another one just popped in. Where would the customer need Xslt skills to configure the automation? Can I create the templates on my own?
Yeah, so the InDesign templates, absolutely. You can create those on your own. And for the transform, the answer on the Xslt skills inside of things is yes, you do need some Xslt skills to be able to do the mapping from DITA or whatever your source content is into whatever your style naming convention or your document structure is on the InDesign side of things. If we think back to the two demos that we showed, we had the ARIA sort of marketing slick, and then we had that disclosure. We had two very different kinds of layouts with different kinds of content, so different semantics. And so there is a different transform for each to map from the common DITA structures or so forth into those outputs. But that's something that you're not beholden to Typify to do the transform work. It's something that is quite easy for anyone that has Xslt experience or skills to tie into and develop that transform, activate that through the Typify workflow, and then go to market.
All right. Looks like the last question is, what versions of InDesign does Typify work with?
So Typify, our policy or standard is to work with the current version of InDesign and the prior 2 versions of InDesign. next week, we'll be releasing the full support for InDesign 2020. Currently, we support 2019, 2018, and 2017. After next week, we'll be in a transition period for about 90 days before we shut down the 2017 support on our cloud servers. But if you're running on-prem, you can choose when you want to upgrade or whatnot. But yes, we always give you essentially 3 years worth of InDesign support with any version of Typify.
Thanks, Caleb, for the great demo. Thanks for joining in. Everybody be safe out there, and we appreciate your time.